And one of the specific things Wilder's been doing with us is to help track the data so that we can begin to see what the changes are over the corridor, both by the work that you're doing, but also by outside forces and trying to understand where the corridor is going. So we are today releasing the third such partnership with Wilder Research to do this Central Corridor Tracker. And Jane Tigan is going to tell us about the changes that show up in this year's tracker.
Thank you, Jonathan. This is the third year of the tracker report, but it's the second year that I've been privileged to present to all of you. And can I just say what a difference a year makes? We saw those pictures of the construction, but I think even more so is the fact that a year ago there were 0 snowflakes on the ground, and today they are still with us. Well, the Central Corridor is obviously continuously improving, and so is the tracker report. I want to highlight a couple of changes to the report before I dive into the data part. We've always looked at the corridor from downtown Minneapolis to downtown St. Paul, and then the widest part is about from Pierce Butler to Selby Avenue. And for folks who are familiar with the report, you know that we've looked at it in a 3-segment breakdown. This year we've switched to 6 segments, and that's really to reflect some of the nuances along the corridor and also to align with some work that was done about market analysis. And so folks who are most interested in those segment breakdowns, you can find it on the map of the tracker. It's also available in the full outcomes report, which is online. The second big change is that we've included 4 new indicators in the access to affordable housing key outcome, and this is really a reflection of, again, moving from construction into that next phase. These are the work of the Big Picture Project, and I'll talk about those in more detail in just a little bit. I'm going to structure my remarks in the key outcome areas that Jonathan talked about, beginning with strong local economy. This is really our most robust section in the report right now. And one of the things that we ask are residents and folks who use the corridor able to rely on the corridor for a stable mix of industry and businesses. And we can see that over the 3 years of the report, that the mix of businesses really has been pretty stable. So we're not seeing that there have been large shifts that have caused people to have to use the corridor in a different way on the day-to-day. But we have seen a slight decrease in the overall number of establishments, and that's especially reflected in finance and insurance, as well as some of the smaller establishments. And you'll see that in the tracker report. We've seen an increase in the overall number of healthcare and social service industry establishments, and that's really a reflection of some larger economic trends, but they're trends that the corridor is benefiting from. When we zoom in to look at the businesses that are just immediately fronting the corridor, we look at the change since the beginning of construction through 2012. And last year I reported that there was a net loss of 3 establishments. And this year we're seeing a net gain of 2 establishments. Now that's, that's not a huge peak, but I want to point out that there's a lot behind that net gain of 2. We see that since the beginning of construction through 2012, 93 businesses opened immediately fronting the corridor, but there were also 91 businesses that either chose to relocate off the corridor or had to close their doors. There were 24 businesses that relocated on the corridor that were already there. So there's a lot behind that increase of 2. We also look at how jobs and job opportunities have been created by construction, especially pertaining to female and minority work hours. And through 2012, so from the beginning of construction through 2012, the work hours for women and minorities actually exceeded goals. So that's something of note. Now, what is a corridor if not a vibrant transit-oriented place? So we look at our neighborhoods becoming more transit-oriented. Now, the Central Corridor has always had a higher residential density than Minneapolis-St. Paul as a whole, but we're seeing that there, over the 3 years of the report, about 454 new units, housing units, have been added. Most of those are in the University of Minnesota area and segment, but we're seeing as time goes on that other segments are beginning to see the impact of that development. We look at walkability, so not how pleasant is it to walk on the corridor. There are other studies that look at at that sort of walkability. This is really about proximity to services and amenities. And overall, the average score, walk score of the stations of the corridor has been consistent for 3 years. So we're looking at a very walkable corridor according to the walk score. And by segment, we see a little bit variation with some increases in the Midway East and downtown St. Paul segments. I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but it takes a lot of work to do all of this. You all know that very well. And so the Funders Collaborative takes this opportunity to ask about 50 key stakeholders a whole host of questions about how is the coordination and collaboration of these stakeholders going. For those of you who are in the room and who participated in the survey, thank you for your time and for your effort. And we ask a lot of questions, so they gave us a lot of their time. But we pull out these 3 high-level questions. We've asked this for 3 years, and each year we've seen increases in the stakeholders who believe that common equitable development goals are shared, that stakeholders collaborate effectively, and that stakeholders feel very well informed. Now you might look at that 53 number as compared to the 88% and say, Jane, that's not very high. But that's very well informed. We also look at well informed, and that's over 90%. And anybody who is on a Central Corridor email list knows about being well informed. Now the last segment that I'll talk to you about is access to affordable housing. And as I mentioned, these are the work of the Big Picture Project. I want to make a note that these data are preliminary and that the full report will be available in August-ish, I believe, end of summer 2013. So the work of the Big Picture Project identified 2 large measurable goals, which Jonathan mentioned. The first is about housing with enduring affordability, and that's that expanded goal of about 4,500 new and preserved units built by 2020. Now, since January 1st, 2011, there have been 2,159 new and preserved units, and that's on track to meet the goal. But that doesn't mean that people can pack up and go home. The work isn't done. About 1,700 of those units were from a historic investment in Cedar Riverside Towers, and so it's especially important that the pace picks up. The second measurable goal was about, or is about, I should say, helping low and moderate income households stay in their homes. And so since January 1st, 2011, at least 187 households have been assisted through programs like mortgage foreclosure assistance, rehab for vacant and foreclosed properties, and other rehab loans. This is also on pace to meet that 2020 goal. The next 2 indicators that we'll talk about are more context measures to help understand some of the pressures for both owners and renters on the corridor. And the first one that we'll talk about is for owners. Oops, I just let the cat out of the bag. Don't look at that yet, though it's in your tracker. So we look at, for owners, we know that property taxes are one of the biggest costs for an owner, especially fixed income households. And one portion of that property tax equation is assessments. And we look at the change in the median estimated market value of single-family homes in order to understand that part of the equation. And from 2011 to 2012, estimated market value of properties on the corridor went down by 11%. Now that's actually just a little bit steeper than Ramsey County residential units as a whole, but that tells us that at least on the assessment side of the equation, the pressure isn't increasing for homeowners on that side of things. Now the second context measure that we look at is the change in median rental rate for available 2-bedroom units on the corridor. And before I go any further, I want everybody to pull out a pen. Does everybody have their tracker? Pull out a pen, and on the left-hand side, you'll find it's a number 3. The indicator number 3, it says change in median estimated market value, or change in median rental rate. It'll say baseline 2011, $1,400. You can cross that out. The corrected version is online, but it's actually $1,125. The $1,400 is what the second year is. So we're looking at an increase from $1,125 in Q3 2011 to $1,400 in Q3 2012. That's a 24% increase, and that's a fairly large increase. What we're seeing is that much of that change is really a reflection of shifts in the University of Minnesota and downtown Minneapolis rental markets. And so I want to put an additional plug here for folks to take a look at the full report that's coming out in August, because at that point we'll be able to talk more about the segment level breakdown, which I think is provides additional context and understanding. Some segments may have seen an increase and others will have seen a decrease. So it's especially important if you're interested in this measure to look at the full report.